Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today Maggie Petrovic, who is Senior Vice President at Emerge. And I think you're going to find this really interesting. If you're a shipper or a carrier, I think you'll be interested in this. And really, even if you're an entrepreneur, I think you'll find this interesting. Maggie and I talk about a lot of topics, primarily around freight procurement, specifically truckload freight procurement. Although we also talk a little bit about intermodal freight procurement, because many times intermodal is a substitute for truckload transportation. So we do cover that. It's really an interesting conversation. We talk about the idea of agreements, contracts for truckload transportation, which is created through a bidding process, which they have a platform that handles that. And in fact, one big shipper, you'll hear about this story in a little bit, has said that it's saved them at least 50% of the time it takes them to procure freight transportation. And you'll get to hear about why it works that way. But we also talk about how Emerge benefits both carriers and shippers, both small and large shippers. And really, in a lot of ways, it really helps the economy. Anytime you can get, two parties in a more efficient transaction where price is being able to be made decisions about in a very, logical and rational manner, you have a more efficient economy. And so this certainly provides for that. I think you'll find it really interesting. She also talks about a number of features and functions that the platform has that are quite interesting. And, their platform allows shippers to have access to over 45,000 carriers and their rates. But as you know, service is also important. And so she talks a little bit about that and how that works as well. So I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and chat with you.
Maggie, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your background before we get into the discussion?
Sure, happy to. I went to the University of Iowa and learned about logistics at a career fair. I'd had a teammate from college who had worked at Coyote Logistics and talked to them at the career fair and thought that could be cool. While I was in college was when the Great Recession happened. So I was interested in, any company that sounded like Coyote was hiring 400 employees that year. So that to me felt like a great sign. I had no idea really what logistics meant other than trucks and accepted a job there. So I spent the first 8.5 years of my career at Coyote Logistics doing various functions. I started in account management. Then I worked in our managed transportation department, which I think, again, now resonates in a lot of the work that we're doing with them, or that we're doing at Emerge now. But from there, then I spent some time doing merger and acquisition integration. So Coyote acquired a large flatbed broker called Access America Transport. And I moved and integrated one of their offices into Coyote's culture, technology, trained all their people. And then after spending about a year there, that was when UPS acquired Coyote. And so from there, I moved to UPS's office and integrated the UPS and Coyote together. And from there, we wanted to expand to Europe. And so I spent some time in Poland integrating a company that we purchased called Freightex into, again, Coyote's people, process, technology. And then when it seemed like those projects, had ended, or I had been challenged enough and moved around the country and the world enough, I took a role in enterprise sales. So selling our services to Fortune 500 shippers throughout the country. And around that time I had started hearing about, there was a lot of changes happening in the market, Convoy, Uber, more tech providers entering the space. And I entertained looking at Emerge's technology from a recruiter and saw something that I thought couldn't be ignored. And I really thought that there was an interesting value prop in the market. And that's what brought me to Emerge a little over 4 years ago. So I've also worn various hats at Emerge, but currently I oversee all of our strategic partnerships. And so that means leading our premier partner program with the largest asset-based trucking companies in the country, as well as data partnerships, TMS integrations, and consultancy partnerships.
So I know that Emerge aims to reinvent freight procurement. Can you share more about the problems in the industry, specifically the ones that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, of course. I'd be happy to. So Emerge started about 6 years ago as a spot tool. And it was, if you rewound a few years back, we were actually branded as Emerge TMS. And that was the foundation of the product that we brought to market. And we learned through the spot solution that there was really a larger opportunity out there for us to solve for shippers, and that was in the contract space. And so in 2020, we launched our RFP platform, and that's really where we've seen a lot of adoption, given we all know what happened in 2020, but the impact that COVID had to procurement and logistics planning in general was really interesting. So prior to our product going to market, you really had an annual event and spot, and there was really nothing in between. Maybe if a shipper opened a new warehouse, they would have an ad hoc bid, but there are really those two traditional ways of procuring capacity. And then COVID happened, and shippers needed to take action quickly to get new capacity, find, source for changes in their supply chains, et cetera. And so our product was really well timed for that unexpected change in the market. And we had this easy to use platform that solved that in-betweener freight. And so that's really where we started to see quick and fast and positive adoption from the market. And then since then, over the past 4 years, we've been building and continuing to evolve this RFP platform to support the needs of large enterprise shippers to run their annual events. So we want to be a procurement platform that solves all of the needs of transportation. So anything from an annual RFP down to a load level coverage on a spot shipment.
So there may be some people listening to this that don't know what is meant by a spot. Would you mind explaining that?
Sure. So a spot shipment is a variety of ways and means different things to different shippers, but at its core, it is an ad hoc need for capacity, and that's either due to a routing guide failing. So if a shipper had contract rating on it and that carrier isn't available, something happened in their network where they don't have rating, and so they need to go get rating. But it is a one-off shipment where a shipper needs capacity and therefore is likely going to pay a market rate instead of locked in at some sort of contractual rate.
Yeah, and for those listening, the routing guide lists the carriers that the shipper is planning on using because of agreements that they have. And one thing that's really unusual about truckload transportation compared to many other markets is that generally speaking, the contracts are not enforceable in terms of, it's impossible for a carrier to guarantee they've got capacity at one point. And it's impossible for a shipper to know exactly how much they're going to need to move at each point in time. So it's not enforceable, but they still come up with an agreement, and that's called the routing guide. The routing guide lists the agreements, and then if they fail to be able to accept a shipment that's tendered, then they can go to the spot market. But what sets Emerge apart from other freight procurement platforms in the market?
Yeah, so when we launched in 2020 with this specific product, we were competing with Coupa and Jagger, but also emails and spreadsheets. And so when you think about those three different solutions, our biggest differentiator is that we are bringing new carriers to the RFP. So in a Coupa or a Jagger type platform, the shipper identifies their network. It's typically, some incumbents, most of their incumbents that they work with, they're going to add some new carriers to test rating or add what would happen to a network to add a new provider, and then they'll go to bid. Whereas with Emerge, we invite all of the shipper's network, as I mentioned before, whoever the shipper wants to invite, and then we also expose that opportunity to our marketplace of 45,000 asset-based trucking companies. So the sweet spot for us is a shipper who wants to save money and who is open to new carrier capacity. That's really our core differentiator against Coupa and Jagger in the solution space. There's also a very key differentiator in how we monetize. So those platforms are, high ticket SaaS-based models, and we do not charge SaaS fees. Shippers utilize our technology, and then when we introduce capacity, we monetize through that connection. So we do not charge, these large ticket SaaS fees. Our bread and butter and how we're looking to grow is through that direct connection and marketplace liquidity that we're creating through bringing more shippers onto our platform and connecting with that net new capacity that we're introducing them to. And then finally, all of those two platforms that I mentioned are very robust and sound platforms, but they're not freight specific. And so we pride ourselves in being a freight platform that was built by freight people. So a lot of, the problems that we're solving are freight specific and customizable given what we know shippers need to do in order to execute a large network bid.
Truckload transportation is such an interesting market because there's a large number of very small carriers, and there's really, the large carriers make up a small percentage, but it's a huge market, hundreds of billions. And but I'm curious, that's on the carrier side. Yeah. How does Emerge help both large and small shippers optimize and automate their freight procurement process?
Yeah, so on the optimization front, again, speaking specifically about the RFP platform, we help if you think about the life cycle of an RFP, typically you'll do some sort of benchmarking on your existing rates, which could happen in a plethora of platforms and technology solutions in the market today. From there, the shipper will compile their data that they want to send to bid, which could happen in a different platform or typically Excel and spreadsheets or from their TMS and export. And then from there, they're going to go gather bids, which could happen again in a different platform or through emails. And then they're going to come back to the spreadsheet and give that feedback. And then you think about awarding. That awarding is typically going to happen through emails, and then carrier acceptance and responses will happen in emails. And then execution typically happens with legal on a different platform. So think about all of those steps. It's pretty cumbersome, and lots of different platforms, lots of back and forth. We consolidate that entire experience into our technology. So from start to finish, everything I just mentioned happens in the platform. So specifically benchmarking, we have an integration with FreightWave Sonar where the benchmarking rates are surfaced within Emerge, so you don't have to go to FreightWaves and then pull it back into our platform. And then the scenario management is really where we see a lot of great feedback. It is completely customizable, and a lot of, again, what happens in Excel is then done through our platform. So we give some templated scenarios, and if, for those of you who don't know, when I'm speaking about scenarios, I'm talking about the shipper has gathered rates from carriers, and then they're weighing how they want to award the business. They're looking at different scenarios to see if I gave this X amount of business to this carrier and then I did, my lowest cost option, or I looked at 50% asset and 50% broker awards based on lowest cost. Again, customizable. So there are infinity amounts of ways that a shipper could look at their awarding potential outcomes. And then they can award based on that behavior. And then again, get the carrier acceptance and rejections right in the platform. And then move to a contract execution through, we have an integration with HelloSign. It's, similar to the typical signature platforms in the market. And they can actually execute their contracts right in our technology as well.
Can you elaborate on the different features of the Emerge platform, such as procurement management, intelligence, execution, integrations?
Yeah, of course. So features, I could talk for an hour just about features, but I think some, again, of just like feedback that we get from the market and where people like the features. So from carriers, they love there's a Q&A feature. Not only is it Q&A for, direct engagement with the shipper or the contact of the shipper that's running the bid, it's also if one carrier posts it, then another carrier can see that Q&A and see the answer, which I think helps because a lot of people have the same questions. And so the shipper doesn't have to field 50 of the same questions. The carriers can see that someone already asked that and then read how the shipper responded. We also provide a feature called bid feedback, which is in real time, dependent on the shipper's preferences. They can give that feedback directly to their network, which helps drive down costs and also helps carriers know where they need to be to try to win the business. So that's really good from, visibility, transparency, and helping two parties reach an agreement in real time instead of waiting for these rounds to open and close. It can happen, constantly throughout the bidding process. Another piece of feedback that we received recently from carriers is our ability to allow for multimodal pricing within an event compared to some of the other platforms that I mentioned. They told me that our experience is way easier. So if you think about a carrier, these large asset-based companies who have an intermodal arm as well as a truckload arm, if the shipper is trying to gather intermodal rates, meaning over the rail, and also simultaneously on the same lane gather truckload rates, our platform, per this carrier, is the best in the industry and allowing them to surface both rates at a lane level. And then some other cool things, which I think this is, table stakes for our industry now, but capacity constraints. So you were talking about how well, rates hold up and these contracts hold up. A lot of that is due to the carrier's capacity. So we allow for carriers to not only enter their capacity at a lane level, but also at a region level. And that seems to be a differentiator. So the carrier knows where within their network, they're going to have trucks they don't know exactly on the lane. They can actually input within their submission regional capacity constraints. And then finally, again, just leaning back into, we are a freight-specific platform. So the customization is specific to freight. And that really sets our features apart from these competitors because being able to create these custom templates and custom scenarios really helps shippers get to the outcomes that they're looking to do through the technology.
Well, back to your point about intermodal, that's really interesting. And so your point is that your platform allows shippers that may want to use intermodal an easy way to do that and to compare it to just truckload rates as well.
Exactly.
And that's so important right now and into the future. For those of you listening that aren't aware, you know, you can use intermodal where you have a 53-foot container on a chassis. When you're driving down the road and you see one, it looks like just a regular semi-tractor trailer with a 53-foot trailer, but many times it's actually a chassis, 53-foot chassis and a 53-foot container. And what you can do as a shipper is you can have a carrier take your shipment, your container, to a rail yard, put it on a train in what's called a well car, and then it goes to another point, and it's dropped off, and a truck picks it up and takes it to the final destination. That's intermodal. And it typically only makes sense when it's greater than a certain distance, generally. So it's better for long distance types of transportation. But the reason this is so important is that as our roads get more and more congested, shippers are going to have to use more and more intermodal, because when you're using intermodal, you're taking lots of drivers off the road, lots of trucks off the road, and that also helps deal with the driver shortage issues. But I've also heard that intermodal shipments have a 70% reduction in carbon footprint compared to truckloads. There's all kinds of benefits. So it's encouraging to hear that this platform actually facilitates that comparison so that shippers can make a good decision about that.
Yeah, and that's actually something that's been really cool over the past couple of quarters is when we spoke about this marketplace capacity that we're introducing to shippers, we're also now introducing intermodal providers. And so if for whatever reason a shipper didn't invite an intermodal partner that we have, we're starting to surface that net new capacity as well within the RFP, which again brings more competition and cost savings to the shipper to make the best decision for their network.
That's really outstanding. Would you mind sharing a little bit about this Emerge's Premier Carrier Program, how it works, what the benefits are both to shippers and carriers?
Of course, yeah. So within this larger marketplace ecosystem, we have like two programs. One is a Premier Carrier Program and one is our Premier Partner Program. So they're just really based on size and scale. So Premier Carrier is our highest performing carriers from 50 to 999 trucks. And as I mentioned before, within the bidding process, we're going to surface carriers. So for our Premier Carriers, when a shipper runs an RFP, we will show the shipper the carrier's logo, the carrier's rate, their performance metrics, their FMSCA data. So trying to drive more familiarity and trust about adding a new provider. And, that's the benefit for the shipper. Of course, cost savings is paramount, as well as adding a new provider that based on these performance scores you can trust. And they don't have to go through the onboarding process. So the shipper goes through a merge. But again, we're surfacing who that capacity is allocated to, but they don't have to go and set up 20 new carriers. They just set a merge up, and then we handle the onboarding and the vetting of the carriers. And then the value prop on the carrier side is really disrupting and challenging how asset-based carriers had access to contract freight before. If you look back the past 10 years at least, carriers have to go through a broker. So a broker is invited to an RFP, a broker takes risk and buys freight, and then turns around and resells those contracts to asset-based carriers. So there's margin associated with that. There's overhead that's passed on to the shipper, and it's just, a disjointed process. So by giving these asset-based carriers direct access to a shipper's RFP, we can truly find the best carrier for that shipper's network and removing that middleman process.
Would you mind sharing a bit about the Premier Partners Program?
Of course, yes. That is one of the initiatives that I lead at our organization today. So the Premier Partner Program, if you think about Premier Carrier, again, is to 999 assets. Premier Partner are these large asset-based trucking companies, 1,000 plus assets. And so we are bringing a suite of solutions to those carriers. We provide automated bidding solutions. So within Spot and RFP, those carriers have access to an automating bidding experience within our platform. For Spot, there is an API available. We also offer EDI tracking and tendering for those larger carriers. And so we're trying to create, again, a way for those carriers to generate net new volume and serving these backhauls, which if you think about, the largest carriers in the market, they have hundreds of backhauls running empty today. So we are then surfacing that backhaul capacity directly to a shipper in the RFP, which since this program launched in May of last year has been very lucrative for both sides of the market and something that we're really leaning into in 2024.
So I read on the website a quote from Del Monte's director of transportation saying that your platform helped them shave off 50% of the procurement time. That's a lot of efficiency for a transportation manager. It allows them to focus on more important strategic issues. But I'm curious, what specifically helps these managers reduce their time for procurement?
Sure. Yeah. So we talked about the manual touches throughout the procurement process that we're now bringing into one platform, one process, one place for them to go to get one source of truth for their transportation. And then the ease of use shouldn't be ignored either. If you were to look at our UI and our UX that shippers utilize, it looks like a social media platform, meaning it is built for someone that is not a technology person, and it is very straightforward in how to use it, which I think, again, the carrier community, I've spent the Q1 going to 3 different conferences, and the resounding feedback that I received from carriers even was how easy our platform is to use. And I think that when the carrier feels that way and they're just a participant, you can obviously deduce that a shipper is feeling that way too. And through the adoption that we've seen over the past few years, our numbers validate that as well. So specifically, how do we reduce it? How do we reduce and optimize their procurement? I think those are the 2 key features or 2 key ways that we do it. And then last and finally, just to drive home the scenario optimization, if you think about how people ran how should I award and what's the best way to award previously prior to this tool, that took Excel macros, that took a lot of potentially pen and paper, a lot of calculations that were dependent on a person and how well they knew their own network and how well they knew what levers they could pull to drive cost savings. And the fact that our technology is recommending what scenarios to use and also giving them customization, that goes a long way in the cumbersome and time-consuming process that existed prior.
It really is amazing how many processes in logistics are still done with paper and spreadsheets. And I've even seen cases where people will take a picture of their screen and then send it to someone. I mean, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if that would be happening still today, I would have thought there was no way. So you're right. I mean, there's so many ways that I'll bet for a lot of shippers it's more than 50% reduction. Based on what I've observed, I could see how it could be close to 90% reduction because there's just so many manual parts of the process still that most companies are engaged in. But so, a long time ago, not so long ago, and it's still true to today, a lot of the bidding was done annually. And so Emerge has the mini bid feature, which makes a lot of sense because I used to think, how on earth can these shippers be forecasting their demands by lane for a year out? I mean, it seems impossible. So the idea of more frequent bids seems to make sense to me. But how does Emerger's mini bid feature really adapt to changing market conditions?
Yeah, I think, it goes along with what you were just asking about. If we reduce the process and the manual touches, it doesn't have to be an annual exercise anymore. So it really can happen on the fly, and the cadence at which you can run bids becomes a lot more dynamic. And that's certainly a value add that we bring to. And I think that that's where you're starting to see, again, an impact that I think from COVID will forevermore be within our industry is not just an annual event. Now shippers are moving more to quarterly events or seasonal events. And it doesn't take them 4 months to run an annual event anymore because they're so used to this dynamic process in which they need to be on their toes and understanding where their network changes and influxes are happening. I also think that's due to a lot more visibility and, podcasts like this that are bringing more insights to decision makers about the market. FreightWaves obviously is a big media outlet where people can stay up to speed on what's happening in the market. Whereas before there was this annual event and that was what was the fact-finding process. So there's more transparency to understand market conditions, which is important. But the mini bid feature allows for that fact-finding in real time, which helps, make sure that you're understanding where are contract costs compared to spots. The decisions can be made to allocate your freight accordingly, where you're going to have, if cost is most important to you, you can make decisions based on that. Or if service is more important, which a lot of shippers say both. But again, the ease of use and ability to run events in a dynamic and ongoing fashion helps shippers to stay very, very aware and very tuned into what's happening within their network and their costs and their service.
So, I know your platform provides access to over 45,000 carriers and their rates, and that's great. That's very important. But, many shippers will say service is also very, very important. So how does the platform bring that into account?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different varieties of solutions for service specifically, or service visibility within the bidding process. So within an RFP, a shipper is able to upload their own scorecards to, again, empower that scenario decision-making process. So when a shipper runs a bid, they can assign a letter grade score to their entire network. And then when they want to make awarding decisions, they can look at lowest cost with just my A and B carriers, or what's my spend if I award it to just A carriers. So it helps them have more of a qualitative assessment with cost, which is important. So that's for a shipper to utilize, again, just for their own network. And then for the net new capacity we're introducing through our marketplace carriers and our premier carriers and partners is that visibility to their performance. So we import through the FMSCA data, and all of that is visible to the shipper in the platform. So that's showing, their authorities and their compliance scores. And then we also add on our performance metrics. So how that carrier is performed with Emerge, and we're surfacing that to the shipper within the bidding process. So it helps build trust, as I mentioned, and it's a way for us to provide transparency. That is what we are after, and you see that time and time again through the products and features that we release, is trying to bring transparency, competition, and more supply to the demand that's being procured in our platform.
I know that you all are really focusing a lot on data-driven analysis and real-time market rates. And of course, that makes everything more efficient, the market more efficient. It's good for the economy too. But can you explain how shippers can benefit from automated spot pricing? And what does that mean, automated spot pricing?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We've spent a lot of time talking about contract procurement. So it definitely makes sense to dive in more to what's happening with our spot procurement platform. So if we think about, and we'll see what happens, but everyone wants to be the right person to say when the market's going to turn. But if and when spot heats up sometime this year, as people are forecasting, we will start to see more volume flow into spot. So as we talked about before, these routing guides will break down and shippers will need to go procure ad hoc capacity. So our solution for spot is really to drive automation and, again, competition and transparency. So we integrate to a shipper's TMS to digest and input all of their uncovered loads. And then we run sourcing and procurement events at a load level for the shipper. So we invite, again, the shipper's network and then our marketplace of carriers into the load. And there's different experiences dependent on the shipper's preferences. So you mentioned automated spot pricing. So if a shipper is really after automation in their spot buying, we have a way for our platform to leverage the shipper's buying behaviors and machine learning to dictate what the starting bid should be. And then we allow for different cadences and stair-step technology to continue to offer and evolve the price until the load is covered, which also feeds into our API or open API called Capacity Link, where brokers can serve automated pricing that works in tandem with that stair-step technology to really, again, get the lowest price if that's what the shipper is after, or if they have a preference on service and special carriers in their network that they'd prefer. We have technology and features that lean into preference in tandem with price. And so all that being said, similarly to the RFP optimization, if you think about, long gone are the days of a shipper, an enterprise shipper, having multiple planners that are responsible for a lot of spot buying. If they want to truly automate their spot procurement, our platform allows for that. So again, integrate to the TMS, feed your shipments into Emerge for that automation based on your preferences, and then it feeds back to the TMS with the carrier and the rate assigned for tender and execution.
So what would you say is next for Emerge? What are some upcoming features or enhancements that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are constantly talking about it. So, right now we are really focused on continuing to, achieve our mission with providing shippers best-in-class procurement solutions. And we've spent, the past 6 years really investing in the shipper. I think you will start to see now throughout this year and next year, we will also go to market with procurement solutions for carriers. And what that means is not obviously carriers running bids, but that means more so how do we drive more automated behaviors and experiences for carriers than our technology. We know that a bid can be very cumbersome and exhausting for the carrier community. And so we are developing, discussing, and, mocking up ways that we can help create a better experience for carriers within the bidding process.
Maggie, you have a lot of experience in logistics, over 12 years of experience directly in this area of logistics. And you've seen lots of entrepreneurial efforts and innovations. So what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs looking to innovate in logistics and technology industries?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly a lot of entrants in our industry. Based on COVID, supply chain became something that no one in my family knew what it was, to now I think the majority of the public knows what supply chain means, or at least that's how things get on my shelf. And so I think that there's a lot of attention now being drawn to innovation in our space. And what I would say specifically on innovation is just because there's existing technology doesn't mean that there's already a solution. I think that there's certainly better ways to do legacy technologies and evolving what has predated us and finding a better way to do that. So I would encourage people, if they have ideas, to evaluate what's out there and see how your product could provide a better experience and more easy to use process. And then secondly, I would say what again, reflecting on these past 3 conferences I've been to, hearing direct feedback from your users is the most powerful validation and way to continue to evolve your product. So, if you have an idea, I would recommend talking to who your target audience would be and confirming and validating that the solution and idea that you have will get adopted and will provide a better experience, because at the end of the day, you need customers. So that the past couple of months have been very reaffirming and validating for our team to hear that our users are satisfied and happy, and again, hear direct ideas from them of how we can continue to be a best-in-class solution. So that's pretty cool. And then the last thing I would say, more on the people front in building a startup, direction and strategy can change pretty quickly based again on the feedback and adoption you're having of your products and your technologies. So being transparent and vocally leading your people is something that everyone should do. Continuing to reiterate your North Star time and time again helps ensure that all of your people and all of your teams are marching to the same beat and are on the same mission with you. And I think that's incredibly important as strategies change and shift, to make sure that your people and everyone within your team is trying to achieve the same goals is super important.
If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors, as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.